now available in paperback and ebook. The Man Who Rules the World. John Haynes must bring together men and gods to overcome a threat that seeks to destroy the planet. The Man Who Rules the World. Now available in paperback and e-readers everywhere. One of my viewers sent me an article which detailed that there were plans for a much darker series of sequels to 2008's Iron Man. Now, 2008's Iron Man was the movie that started the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and I loved that first film because it had rich, multi-dimensional characters, a lot of depth and layers, and that was something that was sorely lacking in the two sequels that were made in 2010 with Iron Man 2 and 2013's Iron Man 3. Now, 2010's Iron Man was an extremely rushed movie, and it really did not capture the heart of the Iron Man character and Tony Stark the way the first movie did. Now, that was partially due to the fact that the film was rushed out after the first was an unexpected success, but the third movie was a major disappointment because it just was another movie that was just a part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe that was all flash and had absolutely no substance. Now, after reading about the plans for a much darker series of Iron Man movies, I really wish they had gone in that direction, because that darker direction they planned was an adaptation of the classic 1970s storyline Demon in a Bottle by the greatest Iron Man writer, I believe, so far, David Michelinie, John Romita Jr., who did fantastic art, and Carmine Infantino, who did some fill-in issues, and the legendary Iron Man inker, Bob Layton. Now, the Demon in a Bottle storyline follows Tony Stark as he descends into alcoholism due to the problems he's having at the time with his Stark International Corporation, having to deal with issues as related to Nick Fury initiating a hostile takeover to ensure that munitions are continued to be manufactured by S.H.I.E.L.D. And in addition to this, he's dealing with the stresses of being the leader and the chairman of the Avengers, and he's also dealing with a menace from his suit malfunctioning as a result of it being radio controlled by new rogue at the time, Justin Hammer. Now, your Justin Hammer was a lot richer as a character in the comics than the way he was portrayed in the movie. And I really would have loved to have seen the Justin Hammer from the comics be the core villain of the next two Iron Man sequels, because that character could have easily carried two movies and really built for a rock-solid character transformation arc over those two movies, as we saw Tony's descent into alcoholism and him dealing with many of the issues going on in his life. And it looked like to me that your Marvel Studios, when it was run with working with Paramount at the time, was going in that direction as related to Tony's alcoholism. They had shown in the first few frames of the first Iron Man movie Tony drinking in Vegas, then showing him drinking in Afghanistan after the success of the Jericho missile launch, having a cooler pop up with some whiskey, and it really was building up to show that Tony was having an issue with drinking early on, and he was using it to combat the stresses in his life as related to his success. And I believe that would have further been exacerbated after he returned to the States and had to deal with the traumas he experienced in Afghanistan after encountering the 10 rings. There would have been a great build slowly and organically into Tony drinking more to having to deal with the fact that he had this shrapnel in his heart, and he was dealing with all of the traumas of what he experienced, seeing all of the death, violence, and destruction that was going on around him, processing what happened with Yinsen sacrificing his life, and then trying to deal with the pressures of having to try to go out here and cope with working with this armor that was needed to take to be able to preserve his life. There were a lot of reasons to motivate Tony to be drinking, and that would have built into a series of sequels, because the sequel, as I saw it, Hammer should have been the one seeing the weakness in Tony and then trying to exploit that weakness, and that leading to him going out here and making mistakes like what happened in the Iron Man comics with the Cornelian ambassador. He's thinking that it's him that caused this man's death, but really it's Hammer who caused the death, and he's trying to. And then as the story goes on, he finds out that it was Hammer, and then we get introduced to these villains that they could have had in the movie. They could have easily brought in your Whiplash organically that way, along with Blizzard and possibly Beetle and others. They could have even brought in the Spy Master, talking about how Hammer wanted to steal Tony's technology, and that could have easily organically led into an Iron Man 3 movie, which would have been the Armor Wars, which would have been the big payoff as related to the alcoholism storyline, as Hammer continuing to be the villain. Now, instead of going in that direction, what happened was Paramount stopped producing the Iron Man movies and the MCU overall, and it got taken over by Disney when Disney bought Marvel. And when Disney bought Marvel, they decided to go in a different direction with the Iron Man movies, and instead of trying to adapt the Demon in a Bottle storyline, they decided to compromise, and they decided to do something a little bit more lighter. Now, they decided to go out here, instead of saying that Tony was having an alcohol issue, they wanted to say that he dealt with his traumas as related to what happened in Afghanistan and what happened in the Avengers. That was something that happened that was led to him in Iron Man 3 building all of these armors. But I would have rather have seen your Tony Stark dealing with all of these stresses, because he was adjusting to a brand new life as related to dealing with his impairment, as related to the shrapnel in his chest and the arc reactor, then dealing with the Avengers, and then also then dealing with the whole thing with seeing the Chitauri and finding out he wasn't the smartest person in the room. That would have been a lot of great motivations to show your Tony Stark going down this darker road, and then him having to deal with Justin Hammer, also seeing that there was great Stark tech as well, and also working with other things like this Chitauri alien technology. A lot of great elements for some great storytelling that could have led to a better series, as I believe, of Avengers movies. I mean, Age of Ultron was okay, but the whole thing was your Tony drinking could have built up into a stronger storyline for movies like Captain America Civil War, and it could have also led to a much better organic reason for his confrontation with Thanos, and him getting defeated by Thanos, because his drinking would be impairing his judgment, and he would also have to deal with the fact that he had bruises to his ego. This would have been a much darker storyline for the character to go through, and a much more satisfying character transformation arc that could have ended in a very organic way in Avengers Endgame, and it could have led to a much better storyline overall than what we got, because I believe the Tony Stark character fell apart in the movies with Iron Man 2, which really was basically just a showcase to introduce War Machine and all these other aspects, and it just was just filler, and Iron Man 3 was basically another filler movie, and we never got to see Tony get the rich character development, and we never got to see all of the great storytelling like we got in the first movie, which basically captured the spirit of the David Michelinie, John Romita Jr., and Bob Layton run. That first movie captured the heart of the Iron Man movie, of the Iron Man comics, and that first movie really felt like an Iron Man comic book come to life. But the sequels really did not really capture much of that heart and that soul. And while they were very flashy with all of these different armors, they really did not have much of the substance of the original Iron Man movie, which showed a man who really had no real connection to people, and the suit was the thing that connected him to people. And I really would have loved to have seen, like I saw in issues of Avengers, Captain America sitting there talking to Tony about his problems, and Rhodey trying to help him out as related to things. We did get to see a little bit of that in Iron Man 2 with that fight, but that was really shallow. I mean, Rhodey was really there for Tony, and we never got to see Bethany Cabe, who was a key character to the Demon in a Bottle storyline. They decided to go with Pepper Potts instead, but I really would have loved to have seen Bethany Cabe in the story, because her character was key to the Demon in a Bottle storyline, and she was the person who helped Tony to see what he was doing to himself, and really was the person who really was there for Tony during the darkest days of his life and helped him get himself back to being the man that he was, and go out here and be a better hero. Now, I also would have loved to have seen the Silver Centurion suit at the end of the whole trilogy, because the Silver Centurion suit, that was a suit that symbolized Tony's comeback as a hero. And in the second alcoholism storyline done by Denny O'Neil, Jim Rhodes took over as Iron Man, but the red and silver suit symbolized a new beginning for Tony, and that was something that I really wish had not been done, like it was marginalized in Iron Man 3, because the Silver Centurion armor represents a transformation for Tony. It represents him coming out of the rock bottom of being an alcoholic, and it symbolizes him going out here and trying to restore his gleaming reputation. And it goes out here and it represents him going out here and confronting the man who destroyed him, Obadiah Stane. Now, Stane was used in the first Iron Man, but it would have been great to see him confronting Hammer in said suit, and it would have been a great conclusion to see this suit in action. Unfortunately, they decided to go in a different direction, and Disney wanted to do that because they thought, oh, an alcoholic wouldn't transfer well to the screen, but I believe it would have transferred very well over the course of several movies, and we would have seen, Tony eking out victories maybe in Iron Man 3, and we would have seen him definitely fall from grace in Iron Man 2, because I believe Iron Man 2 could have been like Empire Strikes Back, and it could have been a movie where we saw your Tony, who managed to say he was Iron Man, and then in the second movie, he's wondering if he wants to stay being Iron Man, and then in the third movie, he realizes that the world does need Iron Man in order to combat menaces like a Justin Hammer, who want to go out here and use that technology to do harm to others, and he would work to use his tech to do things like try to stop these rogue armors and these rogues that are out here as part of Hammer's super army. I mean, that again, we could have gotten your Whiplash or your Blizzard and other characters as Hammer's hirelings who were going out here doing harm, and it would have been a much more compelling storyline than what we got in the second movie with the whole vibranium and all of the palladium and all that other silliness, and him being locked in the house by Nick Fury. The second movie was a jumbled, forgettable mess, and the third movie, the less said about it, the more you're better off. But I would have rather have seen a Iron Man 2 and an Iron Man 3 that followed that darker theme, because I believe that if we had that Iron Man 2 and Iron Man 3 that followed darker themes, we would have gotten a trilogy on the level of the Dark Knight trilogy, because the Dark Knight trilogy was one of the best storylines as related to superhero movies, and I believe if we had good writers, we could have gone far beyond the shallowness of the sequels to Iron Man, and we could have gotten a definitive Iron Man series of movies the same way we got a definitive run of Iron Man comics back when David Michelini, John Romita Jr., and Bob Layton were working on the Iron Man comic. Now, if you want to see me do more comic-related videos, you can donate to my Patreon, my PayPal, or my Cash App by clicking the links in the description box. And if you want to see me be able to pick up some of my action-packed African-American fantasy fiction, like the ISIS series, the E-Steam series, the John Haynes series, and the books of the Spinsterella trilogy, you can find all of those books on Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle format. You can also find them on Smashwords, the iBook Store, and Google Play. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe. Now available in paperback and Kindle Unlimited, John Haynes, A Conversation with Death. The man who rules the world and the angel of darkness take on a horde of demons in this inaugural John Haynes series adventure. Get John Haynes, A Conversation with Death for 99 cents on Kindle or in paperback today.